Welcome to the Iron Prescription podcast with your hosts, Drs. Lynette and Stuart. We're both GPs and we're both personal trainers, though we do both jobs in very different ways. We chat about the best things you can do for your health and fitness, and along the way, help you to avoid wasting time on the things that really aren't. Thanks for listening. We thought we'd talk about supplements, didn't we, today?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go.
I thought I'd start by saying, Professor Maitland-Nib, do you take any supplements?
I do, actually.
Oh, okay. That's a good starting.
I take Omega, I take vitamin D, and do I take anything else? And I take creatine, which is a supplement. And that's it.
Okay. Why do you take them?
So I think there's a significant amount of research around the Omega oils that enough to convince me that although there is some contrasting research that says no, it doesn't do anything for you, but from a cardiovascular health, from a general mobility perspective for joints and everything, I think there's enough evidence to suggest that it's definitely not going to harm you and it's probably going to do some good as opposed to possibly. And vitamin, again, I take vitamin D, I take 4,000 international units. I think anything below that is ridiculous. And I think given where we live in the UK and where it is in the Northern Hemisphere, the vast majority of people living in this country are almost certainly low on vitamin D because we just don't get enough sunlight. And the recommended NICE value of 400 international units is just not even touching the surface. So I take 4,000. And the evidence around vitamin D is huge. So, yeah.
Huge? In what way? When did you last look at it? And I'm being a bit picky only because I have been looking at this in the last 3 weeks at the request of my clients. And I have had many patients over the years ask what supplements they should take, which supplements I recommend, I've had a lady empty her handbag on the table and the desk and say, which of these do you think are doing me any good? And it can very much become this vortex of supplements that pull you in.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you're spending a fortune. So I agreed that I would look into this in as objective a manner as I could for my clients. And we had the group call last week and I did things properly and put a presentation together and presented what I see as my interpretation of the evidence with my own bias in that I don't think we need any.
Okay, interesting.
Now, I didn't go and do big literature searches other than looking for summaries. So studies of studies, meta-analyses a little bit. I didn't read the full papers because I've got lots of plates spinning and time is limited. But there are some good resources where people have argued these things backwards and forwards. And I'll start with vitamin D because vitamin D is the one that is recommended, quite rightly, as you say, for all of us to take at a particular dose on the basis that we'd probably get some benefit.
Yes.
But it doesn't say benefit how.
So I think the evidence would suggest, for a start, I don't think vitamin D is a cure for COVID. I don't think vitamin D is a cure for cancer or anything like this, but I think vitamin D is an essential vitamin. It's quite an unusual vitamin in the way that it's created in our system. It requires something that's not innate to us, so we can't just extract it from our diet and it needs conversion, and you need to have certain levels to get that conversion with UV light, etc., etc. There is enough evidence that says that it's good for your mental well-being. In fact, it's prescribed fairly regularly now in mental health services. It is good for your immune system, and there is some evidence that it certainly increases your potential of being able to get over a viral illness faster, as opposed to being somebody who is definitely low in vitamin D. And the downsides, unlike other vitamins, so that let's be absolutely clear, and I think we've touched on this before, something like beta-carotene, which is you can get a supplement, there was a big study done because they thought beta-carotene actually would stop you getting lung cancer. So they gave large doses of beta-carotene to smokers and had to stop the study because they found that actually, no, it doesn't stop you getting lung cancer, it gives you lung cancer. So the downside to too much of that on beta carotene and vitamin E is that it can be detrimental to you. Vitamin D, there is no evidence apart from, and you're probably going to come back at me and go about calcium metabolism. There is no evidence at doses below 4,000 international units per day or 4,000 or below of any harm being done.
Yeah.
So
I think that was certainly, the conclusion that I came to, and as I shared with my group, that you're not likely to come to any harm, and you can get that dose cheaply.
yes.
And I would consider financial harm to still be a harm. And the level of marketing around a lot of these products can lead people down the path of spending more and more for what is essentially the same product, in the same way that certain over-the-counter painkillers can be bought very cheaply in supermarkets, and the same thing dressed up in nice packaging is £3 more expensive with branded products on. But what was interesting, and if anybody's interested in listening to my main source material with this, it was actually Tim Spector, who for the first time in ages sounded like a doctor thinking critically, because most of the time when you hear of him, and he's very mainstream now and he's very influential with lots of things related to diet and health, and particularly with the gut microbiome, that's how now most people know him. And they forget that in a former life he was an epidemiologist and very skilled at looking at research. So I don't particularly like the Zoe podcast because the presenter's unbearable to listen to, but there was an episode where he was on with I think she was a dietitian. I want to say there's a significant difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist. But anyway, I think she was a dietitian, not 100% sure. Anyway, and they were talking about, do you really need to be taking vitamin D? And he was very critical of a lot of the evidence in terms of its conclusions, and said big meta-analyses. And I went ahead and looked up some of the things that he was talking about. The argument that it helps mood is correlational. And we don't know that if people who are low in mood stay indoors more and are therefore less exposed to sunlight and not able to make vitamin D in adequate quantities. The data really can't distinguish between the two. So it's not cause and effect. There's a correlation. Interesting, fairly valid point, and the data seems to support that. The same applies, if you remember after COVID, there was this big explosion on YouTube of people with low vitamin D are much more likely to die from COVID. And again, we had this same issue of, are people that are less active indoors more the opposite of the healthy people that are outdoors, and therefore they're faring quite badly? There was just no way of distinguishing those people from the data. And his conclusion at the end of this was that there is no evidence that most people will get the benefit that's claimed to be benefit, but there isn't any evidence of harm, like you say.
Yeah.
So we have some sitting next to the coffee machine. I probably would remember to take it 2 days out of 7. And since listening to that, I haven't taken it once. Because it fits with my confirmation bias that actually it's probably not really doing anything at all. And therefore it's another thing that I don't have to be asked with.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is that you're falling into the trap of is when you talked about, it was interesting when you said about the analgesia, and I'm gonna mention trade names, I don't care. So Nurofen would say their product is superior to ibuprofen, and that's based on studies. And what you're discounting in your analysis of whether or not vitamin D works is the placebo effect. If you believe it's going to work, it will have a positive effect on you. So if you believe your supplement is working, then I'm like, yeah, crack on, because I believe that is incredibly powerful. And who am I to take that away from someone?
Okay, and I've just said this very thing literally 20 minutes ago to one of my clients who's asked me this thing of, should I buy such and such supplement? And I am very much in favour of placebo effect, but I'm also mindful of financial harm. And some people I know are spending an awful lot of money on supplements every month.
Yes, I know. I appreciate that.
So it's pulling that back and balancing that out, I think, is tricky. But I will admit I have a bias in that I probably don't want to believe these things will work. I want to believe that I can get everything I need from the food that I eat. But
but it's the same. You're right. I'd push back and I'd say, what about the client that says to you, I don't need a personal trainer. I can get everything from YouTube. And but where would you feel better?
There are some people who can get immense value and consistency. Most people that I work with, because either they don't know where to start, they want to outsource the thinking, or they know they won't show up to hold themselves accountable.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything I can really teach them that they can't find themselves. But have they got the time or the interest to do it? It's a bit like with supplements as well. The data's all out there, but most people can't be bothered wading through that. They'd rather get on with their lives.
Yeah.
It's not the saddos like me that sit and do it.
Yeah, but there's also the element of they come to you and you make them feel better. You're a placebo effect, because if you tell them they're doing well, then they feel great about it. If they tell themselves they're doing well, it's not quite the same. And it's the same with if you get vitamins from your diet, people want to feel like they're getting something extra. I went to High Rocks on Saturday and to watch my son. He came fourth.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
don't tell me he's framed that as being bad.
First of all, he did frame that as being bad, because you don't get a flag if you come fourth. You get a flag if you came third, second, or third.
Flag.
Then on the Saturday, on the Sunday, he went down to Brighton and ran the half marathon down there in 1:34.
Wow.
With no training. It's a terrible thing to say you hate your children, but I do. But what I was going to say was, as I was watching High Rocks, there was numerous people taking various pre-workouts, various supplements, various drinks, various all sorts of things before they raced. And the thing is, I almost guarantee if I took them away from them and went, no, you don't need that, they would perform in a worse time. It would not be the same outcome, not because that is doing anything, but it's the psychological effect. And it's the same with personal trainers. It's the same with framing it around not doing it in your home, going somewhere else. All of that is about the impact of the full psychological profile. And I think you can't underestimate that enough. Do supplements work? Well, I think they definitely do work because of what the person perceives that is happening to them.
So let's come on to magnesium then, because this is probably the other massive one. And then I'll ask you about your fish oil in a minute. But
can I just say I took magnesium last night?
Did you?
Because I hadn't slept very well for a few nights. And I was like...
Did it work?
I had a great night's sleep.
Oh, you've just discredited everything I've been saying to my clients, that there is no evidence to support magnesium.
Yeah, you're right. From a medical perspective, I work with very acute, very ill people. And if there's something going wrong with their heart, or if there's something going wrong with their lungs, they're critically ill at that point, I'll go, let's try some magnesium. And they get it. And I give them a big dose of magnesium to interrupt their dying process. And that works. So why wouldn't it work in a tablet? It's
been pulled into the world of perimenopause, very much so. And if I think about the last year in work, it's probably been the one thing that lots of women have asked me my opinion on as to whether or not they should be taking magnesium. And there are lots of qualified doctors on the internet talking about different types of magnesium that you can take for different reasons. And I cannot retain those different types and those different purposes. It just won't stick in my head. It's like NHS pensions. It won't stick. It's just, there's no space for it in there already. So I've looked at them as a whole and tried to look at the totality of evidence for this, and have come up lacking in any convincing scientific evidence. However, it does appear very difficult to truly measure in most people because of the way the body stores it. And it would appear that probably a lot of people are lacking in it in their diet. And I do wonder if people who get some benefit from taking it, and I've got friends who will swear hand over fist that they have felt better from taking it. And that's fine. Again, if it's not, you're not remortgaging your house to pay for it every month. But I wonder if they are in that group who are just running with a low magnesium, and therefore the supplement for them brings them back up to a baseline, because the evidence isn't there that we can recommend it as doctors.
So I disagree with this on the fact that if I'm using something that's for critically ill people and it's having an effect on those people by stabilizing the way the magnesium works in critically ill people, it stabilizes, calms everything down and stabilizes the cell membrane and supports what should be happening within those cells. And if that works at an acutely ill person, then I'm more likely to be convinced actually it's going to be doing something to people generally. And again, I would have to push back and say, what's the harm? Because if you have too much magnesium, hypermagnesia is very rare, and because you just basically urinate it out, you just get rid of it.
Yeah, there was an interesting study. There seemed to be a little bit of evidence for people with migraine. And how many people do we see with migraine? We have a full house of migraine sufferers here, but the evidence seems to come at about 600 milligrams a day.
Yeah.
And you need to take it in divided doses because most people will get gut side effects and can't tolerate it. And that complicates the research. But I guess if your migraines were that bad. So I'm not saying it's not without some role, but the totality of evidence isn't there. And it's this line between what we can recommend as a doctor. We do have to sometimes sit with what the science says, because when we recommend stuff, that carries a lot of weight to people, doesn't it? And I think I was talking to my hairdresser some months back who'd started with yet another PT who'd given her a big list of supplements to start taking, as well as a diet plan. And my heart sank. And I just thought, that person, what's going on here? Take all of these things. I sound like I know what I'm talking about. You're going to feel better. Hang on, I'm also doing you a meal plan. I would have pushed back and said, well, can't you just do my meal plan to make sure that I get the bulk of this in the foods that I'm eating?
Yeah.
Clearly, that person isn't really understanding the mechanism of what it is that they're recommending.
I think what you find is, and I get asked this all the time, about what should be taking, diet plans, etc. And I think what you find is that the reason you get PTs that do this is because you've got two types of PT, to be fair. You've got ones that you quite rightly know that you've just summed up, who haven't got a clue. What they're just like, yeah. And then you've got a PT that actually really understands what they're doing. And what they're saying is, right, I want you to take a gram of protein per kilo of body weight, maybe 2 grams of protein, depending on where we're going with this. And I know that by the time you're taking 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight, you're not going to want to eat anything else.
Yeah.
You've got to put these supplements in, because I know your diet's going to be shit, because what I'm doing to you from that hypertrophy perspective. So we've got to put the supplements in. So I think that's, when you're doing that's perfectly acceptable, because you're saying actually it's going to be really hard for you to get all of that in because of the level of protein that I want you to ingest as well.
Yeah, there's not that much magnesium in chicken, and when you're eating chicken 6 meals a day, yeah, fair enough. I hadn't necessarily jumped to that conclusion about this particular approach with this person, but I was
former. They hadn't really got a clue.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I was doing an appraisal on a GP last week who's mostly working in rheumatology, so seeing lots of people with really horrible and inflammatory conditions. And she was saying she's been working in this role alongside being a GP for 30 years. And she said the number of people wanting her to recommend dietary advice, lifestyle advice, and supplement advice has just shot through the roof. And I'm sure the internet's much to do with this. And she says, I really struggle because we just haven't got the evidence to be able to recommend it. And then people get frustrated that you're not willing to listen to their concerns about what they should be eating. And I do think that's a really tricky space to work in.
It is.
And what is people online, and I've been looking at this morning and just trying to manage my rage about it all. But these people in disciplines, if I can't even call them professions, with no regulator that's accountable to them, that don't hold back. They go online and advocate for unvalidated scientific tests and supplements and just basically all manner of bullshit. And they're not answerable to anybody. And they've maybe got like a few 100,000 people in the comments going, oh, great, you've changed my life. And I'm like,
yeah. But the other thing that I find absolutely amazing, obviously, is the supplement industry is not regulated either by the medication authority at all. When you buy these supplements, you really got to know where you're getting from and what the source is, because I could basically make a supplement tomorrow and call it what I like and say whatever it's in it, and nobody's going to challenge me, and I can sell it for whatever I want.
Yeah. Yeah. And studies have been done. When I read the Menopause Manifesto she's an American gynecologist, there's a whole chapter on this because she like me, gets very annoyed about people being misled about products in the belief it's going to transform their experience of menopause. And she'd looked into some data which had actually took some of these supplements to labs to actually pull out what it is. And the majority of them aren't even what they say they're going to be. And where they are, the quantities fall vastly below what their stated amounts are. So I don't know how you can validate the quality of the product that you are receiving. I don't know a mechanism for doing that because I don't take any.
I think so. My advice would be that you use a trusted source. If you're going to use somebody like Holland & Barrett or Boots or somebody, then a big brand that's got huge amounts to lose if they were found out to be selling whatever tablets or capsules or whatever they are, as opposed to some internet Amazon trader that offers omega 3, 6, and 9 at 25% what Holland & Barrett are selling them for. The writing's on the screen of whether or not that's going to be a genuine product.
Yeah, I remember being at a lecture years ago when the lecturer was talking about Chinese medicine and somebody having been sold something to cure a skin reaction, and when it was analysed, lab, it was Dermavate, which is the most potent topical steroid we have. And I often describe it to patients as, it doesn't necessarily matter what's causing your rash. Take this. Within a few days, it will look and feel significantly better. It's the domestos of the steroid cream world. So yeah, somebody can look very credible with a fancy website and all manner of endorsements from reviews, and it's fairly meaningless. It's a tricky world to navigate.
It is. And I think that's actually interesting. When we talked about, I'll come on to that actually. We talked about weight loss injections that are online now, and the amount of fake ones that are now online. But also there's a lot of capsules that promise you weight loss. And when you actually analyse what's in those, they're incredibly dangerous. But again, there's no regulation and there's nothing to stop people doing it. So you've got to be really careful about what you're putting into your body and where it's coming from. So just to give you an update on my weight loss injection process.
Oh yeah.
It's okay. It's going okay. I've lost 8 pounds, 2 weeks. I've been going 2 weeks. Straightforward. I'm using the Wegovy. I'm on 5 milligrams. Bit of nausea, but just a complete sort of not really interested in food most of the time. And the weight's coming off.
But that's probably a factor in why you've not slept.
Could be. It could be, couldn't it? I don't think it is, because there were other reasons of why.
Yeah, all right, okay. But an extension's more to do with it.
Yeah. But I'll keep going at the moment, see what happens.
Okay. It's your transition off it that I'm most interested in. So at the point that you decide you've had enough of this, whatever the trigger for that may be, that's what I'm very interested in.
Actually, I was going to see what happens, because there's a lot of talk about these people are getting them prescribed wrongly, and people with eating disorders are taking them, and they're now asking for all sorts of metrics when you sign up for it. They want a picture of the scales, they want a picture of you, etc. I just wonder what will happen when it plateau. Does it stop, or do you just keep losing? Do you just keep because they say you should be on it for 2 years.
And that's what the data showed, because I was on the Wegovy webinar recently for their new licensing for cardiac patients post-MI.
Yeah.
And the data in all of the arms of the trial does show, obviously, there's an initial loss, but then there still seems to be continued loss up until about 2 years. Yeah. What's interesting is what happens in the year after that, which I think I talked about on that episode.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like everything. You stop taking it in the same way as you stop taking creatine. If you stop taking creatine, you will lose the benefits of that as well.
So let's go back to fish oil.
Yep.
You take omega. What do you take?
3.
Okay.
Not 6 and 9.
How long have you taken it for?
A long time.
What, years?
Yeah.
You see, you're stuck now. How do you ever back out from it?
I think there's compelling evidence on the Mediterranean diet. And you're right, I probably could get my omega by just having a Mediterranean diet. But again, it won't do me any harm.
No.
Having too much. And I think longevity on life and cardiovascular fitness from the Mediterranean diet is without question. Why wouldn't I take it?
The data on this, I agree. I think the data on the Mediterranean diet, isn't it the only diet with proven in as far as you can ever prove anything with nutritional science to have some credibility behind it?
Yeah.
You can't separate that from the healthy user bias.
No.
In that people, depending on where you are in the Mediterranean, are likely to have a different version of the Mediterranean diet. But as I've said before, the things that are common to it seem to be olive oil and more fish than we eat in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
The trials of supplements are less convincing and don't appear to show any harm. I think that was the conclusion that I came to. There is an argument that manufacturing official supplements poses an environmental risk, but I'm not going to go off on that tangent here. But in terms of harm to health, no, there isn't any. But the data hasn't been anywhere near as convincing in supplementing with fish oil. And yeah, you could substitute that for a couple of cans of mackerel a week or salmon. It seems to be 2 to 3 portions a week enough to get that from your diet if this was something that you didn't want to necessarily take. But yeah, I agree. I think there's any harm to that. I've heard talk of fishy burps in the many of the reviews.
Yeah, I haven't. So I haven't noticed that to be an issue.
Right.
Which probably means that my dealer is
It's no fish oil in it at all.
it's Castrol GTX.
It's engine oil, yeah.
A Mondeo from 1984 or something.
Oh dear.
Yeah, no, I haven't noticed any sort of side effects at all. And so, yeah, again, it's going to offer me no harm, so why not?
Do you remember a while back? It was I'm probably going back 17, 18 years, but we were prescribing glucosamine for a while.
Wow.
There was some early data, wasn't there, that showed it could be beneficial for people with arthritis, and then later trials. And again, and this is probably the bit that we need to be mindful of, is that data can look like it's going in one direction.
Yep.
And then another study can come along, or a meta-analysis of all the studies, and go, actually, these results aren't replicable in enough people over long enough to be valid. And this is almost what happened with glucosamine, wasn't it? In that actually it didn't turn out to be as beneficial as we thought for cartilage maintenance,
Yeah.
for the best way of putting it.
Yeah.
And it was frustrating because we had patients who were probably getting a huge amount of benefit or placebo effect that suddenly we said, well, if you want it, you're going to have to buy it.
Yeah.
And people were pissed off.
They were really pissed off. Like, at all. I think another one, a really interesting, is it a supplement? Is it a medication? What is it? Aspirin.
Oh, okay.
You can buy aspirin now at 75 milligrams.
Pence, wouldn't it be?
It is across the counter. I actually take that as well. And so, but there is huge amounts of evidence around aspirin. But obviously there is a harm in aspirin. There is definitely, there's a numbers needed to treat, an NNT, and a numbers needed to harm when you look at research. So how many people do I need to give this supplement to, or this medication to make somebody avoid what I'm trying to make them avoid? So let's say about aspirin and the use of aspirin to avoid myocardial infarction or a heart attack is X. And that means it might be, I think it's about 1 in 100. So you have to treat 100 people with aspirin to avoid one heart attack in that 100 people. But there is a numbers needed to harm ratio as well. And the problem with aspirin is that it does cause bleeding. And it causes bleeding where you don't want bleeding. So brain, in your guts, etc., etc. So then you have to weigh up the balance then of whether or not you are at a risk that is enough to justify the added risk of the medication or supplement that you're using. And I don't think people really understand that, because there's so much. You can pick up an article, and I know aspirin has been linked to reduced lung cancer rates. It's now linked to reduced prostate cancer rates, reduced prostate
bowel cancer as well. Wasn't there a talk about reducing bowel cancer risk? I remember.
Definitely is reduction in stroke and heart attacks, but is now figures in the guidelines for CT head following a head injury for seeing if there is a bleed or not. So it counts as being an anticoagulant in that whether or not this is going to cause a bleed when you've banged your head falling over, etc.
Yeah, which is a significant cause of death and morbidity in older people. I suppose, though, it's worth mentioning that the big difference is you can do much more valid trials in aspirin because it's not in your diet. So you can have a genuine control group. And the difficulty is with supplements is you can never really have a true control group because we don't know people's baselines for anything. And another interesting thing Tim Spector made about vitamin D was that the personal threshold for it is very individual.
It is.
And he talked in that podcast, which is worth a listen to, about somebody he worked with for years from Sri Lanka who was technically deficient in vitamin D when measured, had absolutely no symptoms whatsoever, and seemed to be fine. And I think that's true of a lot of things. We saw this with B12 injections. There are many people who, for whatever reason, can't absorb B12, and let's not go down that rabbit hole too far, and have had injections for years, either every 2 months, 3 months, or 4 months, and it varies per practice. And then when COVID hit and we weren't allowed to see any patients face to face for a while, they had to be swapped over to oral supplements. And it was really interesting to see the variation on things that people reported, because some people who supposedly hadn't been able to absorb it for years just didn't have it anymore and were fine. Some people seemed to get on okay with the tablets, and a surprising few actually really became very deficient again and needed to resume injections. So it was an unintended experiment. I don't know that anybody collected the data. It's probably a missed opportunity. But again, the individual variation on these things, and I guess there's so much that it's subject to. There's so many other things that can affect your levels.
So the vitamin D. So I did measure my vitamin D levels, and they weren't green, they weren't red, they were amber. And I was like, I'm taking vitamin D, and I took vitamin D. I do take vitamin D, and I take 4,000 international units, 10 times the recommended dose. And I rechecked my supplements, and I was my levels, and I was just green. Now, I would have expected it to smash through, but that's about what my body's doing with vitamin D. And you're absolutely right. When we look at levels of anything, and patients really struggle with this concept of a bell-shaped distribution curve of what's normal. And when you look at somebody's bloods and you go, yeah, I'm not really worried about that. And they go, but it's abnormal, doctor. I've looked it up on the internet. It's abnormal. And you're like, yeah, it's not in the middle of the bell-shaped distribution, but that doesn't mean it's abnormal. It just you're outside of that perfect line in the middle. And I'm far more interested in a trend of what you're doing, not the absolutes. And it's the same with all of these things.
We see that with thyroid results as well, subclinical hypothyroidism. Oh God, I won't go there with that. But this is exactly where the wellness space just comes in like a hero in a cape, going, modern medicine doesn't know what it's doing. Your levels aren't optimal here. Buy my plants that I've grown in the garden and fix everything. And again, because of a combination of placebo effect and confirmation bias, people go, Dr. Quack over there fixed all my perimenopause symptoms with this plant-based herb concoction that I just spend £200 a month on. And I know it's not exaggerated. There are people charging this much.
Absolutely. And we've talked about him before, but Brian Johnson.
Him again. He's been on Diary of a CEO. Have you seen? I've not watched it. I can't. I've had enough of him.
I've gone right off the Diary of a CEO, but that's another conversation. But Brian Johnson, all credit to this guy. He does look... I saw him on a podcast the other day talking about microplastics and how if we went back in their generation, our grandparents were talking about having lead poisoning, and then we were talking about asbestos. We're just in the microplastics world, and how much microplastics are in our testes in male. Okay, and he can measure it. You can buy a thing off him that will measure your microplastic concentration in your testes and your body. Okay?
Wow. I don't even want to know the mechanism by which that works.
But I don't know, it's $199. I don't know, I didn't look. But I'm looking at this guy and I'm thinking, you need to know how much the plastic is in your face because you look plastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
He then tells me that his microplastic levels are lower than the average population because he doesn't drink from plastic bottles, he doesn't wrap his food in plastics. And I understand that plastics probably are toxic. It amazes me as a species, we are so stupid. So we're worried about the climate and what fossil fuels are doing to our climate. And we've got all this evidence about what it's doing to our climate, but we're quite happy to wrap our food in the fossil fuel and leave it in the fridge and then bring it out, unwrap it and eat it, because that's what plastic is, fossil fuel.
Yeah. Funny, I just heard a clip this morning, somebody talking about this, and I've had a complicated relationship with Tupperware. I won't go into it now, but I will not have it threatened because I can't go digging around in that space. But yeah, I'm not opening up to the microplastics thing. I can't go there yet. I'm sure the universe will send more of it my way now, and I won't be able to avoid it. But interestingly, speaking about him and his appearance, because the other thing that I was a bit ignorant to is the world of collagen and collagen supplements. Wow.
How could you be ignorant to that?
Hasn't landed on me until I started being asked about it on repeat.
I'm really worried about your life. I'm
buying Tupperware.
The things that just pass you by. So since we've been doing these podcasts, I've learned so much about you. So testosterone just passed you by. And
for men,
and now you're telling me that collagen has passed you by.
It hasn't now. Right. Now I've had my eyes truly opened to this world of collagen supplements. And I did try and see what science there is behind it. And it was interesting because, my God, the marketing's powerful. I would love a fraction of that marketing power behind prescription strength. I'd have more business than I know what to do with. And the most interesting thing that I found was that it's got nothing to do with the amount of collagen in your blood per se. It's the message that it sends to your skin in order to kick it into action to stimulate fibroblasts and start bucking up their ideas and looking better. All of the supposed evidence is self-reported studies because we don't have any objective means of measuring skin hydration or elasticity, and the competition among the providers seems to be about making it the most absorbable. So there's fierce competition between powders and gels and capsules, and it would appear that there really isn't an outright winner at the moment.
Yeah, because none of it gets absorbed, because the amount you have to, the percentage of what gets absorbed is incredibly low compared to what you're actually taking. It's very poor uptake in the guts. And you're born with collagen, and it's something it's a building block of life, and you run out of it as you get older, and that's why we end up with what we're doing, with the appearances that we get as we get older. But I find collagen incredibly interesting, and the advertisements that people and the claims that are made by people about what you can achieve by taking their supplement.
Yeah, but what it's doing is backing people into a corner because they give it a try, and God forbid they feel it's giving them benefit. When do you ever stop it then?
No, you don't.
You're hooked in for life. And this is what I mean about the marketing is incredibly powerful. You're not going to get the equivalent off of YouTube, that's for sure, unless you do what I do and boil every animal bone that comes through the house and make bone broth, which why more people don't do this, why they're not nerding out on making their own bone broth, I don't know. But trust me, there's plenty of collagen to be had by not throwing your chicken carcasses in the bin and sticking them in your pressure cooker. But there are no plant sources of collagen. So I was thinking that, have we not got a perfect control group with all the lifelong vegans, because they won't be getting any absorbable collagens if they're completely free of any animal products whatsoever. And I'm not aware that they're a particularly wrinkly group of people.
No. I can imagine that it's all to do. But the thing is about, if you look at all the creams that you can buy from various manufacturers at incredibly huge amounts of money that firm up your skin, all they're doing actually is either sticking your skin, giving hydration for a short period of time to the skin by puffing it out. But what vegans are very good at, because of the diet that they're on, and what they're getting is they're very good at hydration. And so they get a lot of water. And what's the one thing that we do as doctors when we're looking at somebody acutely unwell of dehydration is we look at their skin turgor and whether or not it's basically wrinkly when you pick it up. And that's because they're dehydrated. So actually, a lot of people's faces can be fixed with a pint of water several times. But of course, that doesn't make good marketing, does it? What you want is, don't drink, just use cream.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I haven't seen any marketing for collagen through the skin. No, it all seems to be these kind of powders and gels and stuff. That there was one person, there's a good series on Radio 4 called Sliced Bread. It's well worth a listen to, and it will take a particular thing that a listener has requested and look at the evidence. Is it the best thing since sliced bread, or is it crap? I really enjoy that series. And the one on protein powder was really good. I really agreed with the expert. But there was an athlete who was a guest on this particular episode about collagen, and she was convinced so I was thinking of her when you were talking about the Hyrox. She was convinced that this is making a difference to her joints and enabling her to stay athletic and not suffer the effects of overtraining. And I was just listening to it thinking, yeah, you're stuck with that now. You were, whatever, did she say she was paying £40 a month, I think, for her supplements, and was conscious that it was quite a lot of money, but it was worth it to her because she saw it as central to maintaining her athletic abilities and stuff. And I thought, that has put itself perfectly in terms of market positioning. That is exactly what you want to do if you're trying to put a product out to market. So it's quite genius, and I'm probably quite envious, but I am not about to part with my hard-earned cash for any supplements, to be honest. I've not been convinced by any of them. I did try. I do take creatine. Sorry, I did say to all of my clients that what's interesting, I think, about creatine is I can't notice the difference day to day when I'm taking it or not. But the science is really, it's unequivocal. There is more benefits than harms. In fact, I can't really find any evidence of harm from it at all. But I looked again, and there's data for cognitive improvements, performance, muscle strength, reducing the amount of muscle loss as you age, so sarcopenia. But yeah, if I forget to take it for a few weeks and we run out, I don't necessarily notice anything unless I'm training very heavy, and then I'm fairly convinced my recovery is a little bit impaired. But some of that is age. I can't quite lift in the same range for as long as what I perhaps did 4 or 5 years ago.
Right.
So I can't really separate it from that. But I have said to people, I wouldn't necessarily assume you're going to wake up and backflip out of bed. No. Although some people have said they've had quite vivid dreams. I haven't come across this as a consequence of creatine.
No. I think the other thing is that a lot of people rave about at the moment is CBD oils and derivatives of marijuana and the impact that they're having on them. And again, there's varying literature on the impact of those. Obviously, depending on which part of the marijuana you have, there is definite, very strong evidence that some of it definitely does do a lot for you, but it's whether or not when you take out the T part that actually, and you're left with just the C part of the plant, and that doesn't give you the high. Actually, that doesn't actually do anything for you at all, full stop. But people believe that.
Okay. Yeah, I was asked about this. I must say I've not looked into it at all, but I have wondered when I wandered past the pharmacy in the village here and various products were advertised, and I just thought, yeah, this must be so now chemically altered and watered down that they can advertise it in the pharmacy, as opposed to, do you remember when it was first made available on the NHS? I had a run of patients coming in going, when will I be able to get it? Patients with legitimate shitty conditions. And then they quickly said, this will only be available by specialist prescription only. So I was quite relieved of that, really, because I didn't want to be the one to give it yes or no. Yeah. But yeah, I haven't looked into it at all. But given that we've got cannabinoid receptors through our bodies, and see why there must be scope for it. But yeah, to what extent, with what doses, I don't know. I should probably look into that. Yeah, I'm actually going to put together an email series on supplements. I wrote the first one today. It'll probably take me a while to get through it all, but I think there may be some value in just getting these things down and shared with anybody that's interested. Obviously, I'll send them all to the podcast first, but yeah. Okay, so next time I see you, probably be a few pounds lighter again, which made me think there's a topic I'd like to discuss because it's come up in a couple of books that I've listened to recently as to whether or not you can be fat and fit.
Oh, yes.
So, I already have opinions forming in my mind based on these books, and you'll be less fat, but whether or not you'll be more fit next time, but you'll be well placed to comment on that. We'll set that up for next time.
Fantastic. Look forward to it.
Cool.